The garage door opener in my hand felt heavier than usual that Tuesday morning as I stood in my driveway, watching a BMW SUV park illegally across my mailbox. I already knew what was coming, because Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, had that particular look on her face, the one that said she was about to make my day significantly worse. "Owen Sanders, I need to speak with you about a matter of utmost importance to the community," Patricia announced, stepping out of her vehicle without bothering to close the door. She was wearing her signature pantsuit, the beige one that somehow always looked both expensive and dull at the same time. Her blonde hair was styled in that aggressive bob that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," from a mile away. I had moved to this subdivision in Littleton, Colorado just 8 months ago, thinking I had found the perfect property. The house was great, the location was convenient for my commute to Denver, and the price was reasonable. What I did not realize at the time was that Meadowbrook Hills HOA was run like a personal fiefdom by Patricia and her cronies, and they had made the past several months a living nightmare with their constant complaints and arbitrary rule enforcement. "Good morning, Patricia," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What can I help you with?" She marched up my driveway, her heels clicking against the concrete. Behind her, I noticed 2 other women emerging from the SUV, Linda Morrison and Deborah Collins, the vice president and secretary of the HOA board, respectively. This was not going to be a casual conversation. "The board has been discussing the storage situation for our community documents, supplies, and equipment," Patricia began, pulling out a folder from under her arm. "Currently, we are paying $200 per month for a storage unit on Bowles Avenue, which is simply unsustainable for our budget. We have determined that your property has the most suitable garage space for HOA storage purposes." I blinked at her, certain I had misheard. "I am sorry, what?" "Your garage," Linda chimed in as if speaking to a child. "We need to use it for HOA storage. Half of it should be sufficient. We will only need about 400 square feet. My garage was a standard 2-car garage, roughly 450 square feet total. They were asking for nearly 90% of my space. "That is not happening," I said flatly. "My garage is private property. I use it to park my car, store my tools, and keep my motorcycle. You cannot just commandeer it." Patricia's expression hardened. "According to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, the board has the authority to utilize common areas, and when necessary, request the temporary use of private property for the benefit of the community." "That clause refers to emergency situations," I countered. I had read those CCRs cover to cover after the 3rd frivolous violation notice. Like if a water main breaks or there is structural damage that affects multiple properties, it does not give you the right to use my garage as a storage unit. "We have interpreted it differently," Deborah said, adjusting her glasses. "And as the governing board, our interpretation takes precedence." "No, it does not," I replied, feeling my blood pressure rising. "That is not how property rights work. The answer is no." Patricia stepped closer, her voice dropping to a more menacing tone. "Mr. Sanders, I do not think you understand the position you are putting yourself in. The board has considerable authority over what happens in this community. We can make your life very difficult if you choose not to cooperate. Violation notices, fines, liens on your property, these are all tools at our disposal." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "Because I am happy to record the rest of this conversation if you would like to continue." "That will not be necessary," Patricia said, though her jaw tightened. "But I am giving you 48 hours to reconsider. We will be back on Thursday morning to discuss the implementation timeline. I suggest you think very carefully about your decision." The three women retreated to the BMW, and I watched them drive away before heading inside. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from anger. I had dealt with Patricia's petty tyranny before. She had cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes before collection time. She had demanded I repaint my front door because the shade of blue was not within the approved color palette, even though 3 other houses on my street had the same color. She had even tried to fine me for parking my own car on my own driveway because it was a pickup truck, which she claimed violated some aesthetic guideline about commercial vehicles. But this was different. This was a direct attempt to seize my property for her personal convenience, dressed up in the language of community benefit. I spent the rest of Tuesday making phone calls. First, I contacted my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, who had helped me with the house purchase. He listened to my story and let out a low whistle. "They cannot do that," he confirmed. "That CCR clause is standard boilerplate for genuine emergencies. Using it to justify taking over someone's garage is a massive overreach. If they try to fine you or place a lien, we can fight it in court and probably win. But that process takes time and money." "What are my other options?" I asked. "Well, you could file a complaint with the state, request mediation, or see if there is anything in the HOA's own governing documents that provides grounds for removal of board members. But honestly, Owen, the best defense is usually a good offense." "Is there anything about the HOA or Patricia specifically that might give you leverage?" That question stuck with me. I spent Tuesday evening digging through every document related to Meadowbrook Hills HOA that I could find. The covenants, the bylaws, the architectural guidelines, the meeting minutes that were sporadically posted on the community website. Most of it was the usual bureaucratic nonsense, but something caught my eye in the original subdivision plat from 1998. Meadowbrook Hills had been developed by a company called Western Range Properties. The subdivision consisted of 87 homes spread across roughly 40 acres. What was interesting was the access situation. The entire subdivision connected to public roads through a single entrance on Platte Canyon Road. That entrance road, about a quarter-mile long, ran through what was designated on the plat as Lot A, a separate parcel from the subdivision proper. I pulled up the current property records through the county assessor's website. Most of the subdivision was part of the HOA's common area, which made sense. But Lot A, the access road parcel, had a separate legal description. I traced its ownership history. Western Range Properties had sold off the subdivision lots, but retained Lot A until 2003, when it was sold to a holding company called Mountain Vista LLC. That company had owned it until 2018, when it was sold again to someone named Gerald Sanders. My heart nearly stopped. Sanders was not exactly an uncommon name, but it was my last name. I called my father, who lived in Florida. "Dad, did Grandpa Gerald own any property in Colorado?" There was a pause. "Gerald, your grandfather on my side." "Yes, actually. He bought some land in the Denver suburbs back in the early 2000s. Thought it would be a good investment." "Why do you ask?" "What happened to it after he died? Far as I know, it is still in the estate. We never got around to selling it because it is just a strip of land with a road on it. Some title company sends us a bill for property taxes once a year, maybe $300. Your Uncle Ted has been handling it." "Is this important?" I could barely breathe. "Dad, I think I might own the only access road to my entire subdivision." The next morning, I drove to the Douglas County offices in Castle Rock. I needed to confirm what I suspected, and I needed official documentation. The clerk at the assessor's office helped me pull the complete chain of title for Lot A. Sure enough, Gerald Sanders had purchased it in 2003. When he died in 2019, it had passed to his estate. According to the probate records, the estate's assets were to be distributed among his descendants, which included me, my father, my Uncle Ted, and my 2 cousins. "Can you tell me who is paying the property taxes on this parcel?" I asked the clerk. She checked her records. The bills go to a Theodore Sanders in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Taxes are current, paid in full every year. I called Uncle Ted from the parking lot. He was surprised to hear from me. We were not particularly close, but he confirmed everything. "Yeah, your grandpa bought that thing as an investment," Ted said. "Thought maybe the HOA would want to buy it someday, but nobody ever approached us. It is not worth much, so I just kept paying the taxes on it." "Why is someone interested in buying it?" "Maybe the opposite," I said. "Uncle Ted, what would it take for me to buy out everyone else's share? I want full ownership." "Owen, it is a strip of asphalt. What do you want it for?" "Let us just say I have a use for it." "How much?" We talked numbers. The property was assessed at about $12,000. After some negotiation, we agreed that I would pay $15,000 to buy out all the other heirs' interests. Ted said he would talk to my dad and cousins and draw up the paperwork. Given how little the property was worth to anyone else, he did not anticipate problems. "Just out of curiosity," Ted added before hanging up, "what are you planning to do with a road?" "I am going to close it," I said. Thursday morning arrived, and so did Patricia Henderson, right on schedule. This time she brought even more backup, the entire 5-member HOA board, plus a man in a cheap suit who introduced himself as the HOA's attorney, Richard Dannon. "Mr. Sanders," Patricia began, "I trust you have had time to reconsider your position regarding the garage storage arrangement." "I have," I said, "and my answer is still no. You have no legal right to my garage, and if you attempt to take any punitive action against me, I will sue you and the HOA for harassment and abuse of authority." Richard Dannon stepped forward. "Mr. Sanders, I have reviewed the HOA's governing documents, and I believe the board's interpretation has merit. While we would prefer to resolve this amicably, the board is prepared to move forward with enforcement action if necessary. That would include daily fines starting at $100 per day, escalating to $200 after 30 days. "On what grounds?" I asked. "Failure to comply with a lawful directive from the HOA board," he replied smoothly. "A directive that violates my property rights and has no basis in the actual language of the CCRs," I countered. "But you know what? Go ahead. Fine me. I will see you in court." Patricia's face flushed red. "You are being extremely selfish, Mr. Sanders. This community has needs that go beyond your personal convenience. We are trying to save money that benefits everyone." "Then rent a cheaper storage unit," I said. "Or better yet, ask for volunteers instead of trying to commandeer someone's property. I am done with this conversation." "You will regret this," Patricia hissed. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." "Actually, I think I have a pretty good idea," I replied. "Now please get off my property." They left, but not before Richard Dannon handed me an official-looking letter. It was a notice of violation and assessment of fines, claiming I was in breach of Section 7, Paragraph 3, with fines beginning immediately at $100 per day. The letter stated that the fines would be added to my HOA account, and if unpaid, would result in a lien on my property. I called Marcus Chen immediately. "They actually did it," I said, reading him the letter. "They are fining me for refusing to hand over my garage." "That is absolutely unenforceable," Marcus said. "But here is the problem: they can still file the lien, and even though you will eventually win in court, it will cloud your title in the meantime. It is a bullying tactic." "Well, I have a counter-tactic," I said. "How quickly can you prepare an easement termination and road closure notice?" I explained my plan. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Owen, that is nuclear. You understand that, right? You will be blocking access for 87 families." "They started this," I said. "Patricia wants to play power games, fine. Let us see how much power she has when her entire subdivision is landlocked." "Legally, you would be within your rights," Marcus said slowly. "If you own lot and there is no recorded easement guaranteeing the HOA or the homeowner's access across it, then yes, you can restrict access. But the backlash will be intense. Can you draft the documents or not? I will have them ready by tomorrow afternoon. But Owen, think about this carefully. Once you do this, there is no going back." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Draft the documents. That evening, I knocked on the doors of my immediate neighbors, the people I had actually gotten to know over the past 8 months. Most of them were as fed up with Patricia and the HOA board as I was, but they had learned to keep their heads down. My neighbor to the left, Frank Costello, invited me in and listened to my story. "She tried to take your garage. Jesus, Patricia really has lost it." "It gets worse," I said. "She is fining me $100 a day for refusing." Frank whistled. "So what are you going to do?" "Something drastic," I admitted. "And it is probably going to affect you and everyone else in the subdivision temporarily. I wanted to give you a heads up." I explained the situation with Lot A. Frank's eyes went wide. "You are going to cut off the whole neighborhood?" "Just temporarily, until Patricia backs down," I said. "I know it is inconvenient, but I do not see another option. She has made it clear she will abuse her power until someone stops her." Frank leaned back in his chair. "You know what? Good. Maybe that is what it takes. Patricia has been running this place like her personal kingdom for 5 years. Last year, she tried to make me cut down a tree in my backyard because she could see it from her house and did not like it. Never mind that it was completely on my property and not violating any rules. I am tired of it." I had similar conversations with 4 other neighbors. The reactions were mixed. Some were supportive. Some were nervous about the disruption, but all of them agreed that Patricia had gone too far. Friday afternoon, Marcus emailed me the completed documents. The key one was a notice of private property and access restriction. Since Lot A was my private property, and there was no recorded easement, I had the legal right to control who used the road. The notice stated that effective immediately, the road across Lot A was closed to all traffic, except for emergency vehicles and residents of properties, with an explicit recorded easement which, according to my research, was none of the Meadowbrook Hills homes. "There is one wrinkle," Marcus noted in his email. "The county might argue that the road has become a public road by prescription, given that it has been used openly for over 20 years. But that would take a court case to establish, and in the meantime, your ownership rights hold." I also hired a fence company to install a gate at the entrance to Lot A where it met Platte Canyon Road. I paid extra for rush service, and they promised to have it done by Sunday evening. It was a serious gate steel, 10 feet tall, with a keypad entry system. Sunday evening, I drove down to Lot A to inspect the completed gate. It looked imposing, stretching across the full width of the road with private property no trespassing signs posted clearly. I had the codes for the keypad, and I had arranged with the gate company to provide codes to emergency services. I posted the access restriction notice on the gate, along with copies of my property deed and the legal opinion from Marcus confirming my ownership. Then I locked the gate and drove back to my house using the code. Monday morning, all hell broke loose. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when I heard the commotion. Car horns, lots of them, blaring from the direction of the subdivision entrance. I checked the time, 7:15 a.m., right in the middle of morning commute. I walked down toward the entrance where a crowd had gathered. At least 30 cars were backed up behind the gate, with angry drivers standing around, talking on phones, and generally looking confused and furious. Patricia Henderson was at the front, practically screaming at the gate as if it would open through sheer force of will. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked when she saw me approaching from inside the subdivision. "Why is there a gate on our road?" "It is not your road," I said calmly. "It is my road." "Well, my family's road originally, but as of Friday afternoon, I am the sole owner of Lot A. Since there is no easement granting the HOA or any residents access across my private property, I have decided to restrict access." The crowd erupted in overlapping shouts. Patricia's face was turning purple. "You cannot do this. This is illegal. This is kidnapping." "It is not kidnapping," I said. "It is property rights. The same property rights you tried to violate when you demanded my garage. You wanted to teach me about HOA authority. Well, here is a lesson about property ownership." A man I recognized as Tom Brennan, who lived 3 streets over, pushed forward. "Look, man, I get you have a beef with Patricia, but the rest of us need to get to work. Can you just open the gate?" "I will open the gate when Patricia and the HOA board agree to drop all fines related to the garage demand, sign a legally binding agreement that they will never attempt to use my property for HOA purposes, and issue a formal apology for their abuse of authority," I said. "You are insane." Patricia screamed. "I will have you arrested." Richard Dannon was standing near Patricia's BMW, phone pressed to his ear. He lowered it and shook his head. "I am getting conflicting information. The police say they cannot force him to open the gate if he owns the property and there is no easement, but the county attorney's office is not open yet." "Call someone else," Patricia demanded. "The sheriff, the mayor, anyone." I turned and walked back to my house. Behind me, the chaos continued. People were calling their employers to explain why they would be late. Some were turning around, presumably to find alternate routes, though I knew from studying the maps that there really were not any. Meadowbrook Hills was hemmed in by a creek on one side and undeveloped land on the other. By 9 a.m., the situation had escalated further. A sheriff's deputy arrived, spoke with Patricia and several other residents, then came to my door. "Mr. Sanders, I am Deputy Mitchell with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. Can we talk?" I invited him in and showed him all my documentation, the deed to Lot A, the chain of title, the property surveys, and Marcus's legal opinion. Deputy Mitchell reviewed everything carefully. "Okay, so you legitimately own the access road, and there is no recorded easement, correct?" "The original developer sold off the lots but retained this parcel. My grandfather bought it as an investment. It eventually passed to me through his estate. And you have closed the road because of a dispute with the HOA. The HOA president and board tried to commandeer my garage for their storage needs, and when I refused, they hit me with illegal fines. This is my response." Deputy Mitchell sighed. "Mr. Sanders, I understand you are within your legal rights here, but you have got over 200 people trapped in this subdivision. That includes children who need to get to school, people with medical appointments, and folks who need to work. Is there any way we can work out a temporary accommodation?" "I am happy to work something out with the individual residents," I said. "My issue is with Patricia Henderson and the HOA board. If she agrees to my terms, I will open the gate immediately." "What are your terms?" I explained. Deputy Mitchell took notes. "All right, let me go talk to Mrs. Henderson. But just so you know, the county attorney will probably get involved in this, and they might seek an injunction to force you to maintain access. Then I will see them in court, I said. But until then, the gate stays closed. Deputy Mitchell returned to the gate, where the crowd had grown even larger. I watched from my window as he spoke with Patricia. Even from a distance, I could see her animated gestures and red face. The conversation went on for about 10 minutes before the deputy shook his head and walked back to his patrol car. Around 11 a.m., a tow truck arrived. Patricia had apparently called to have the gate removed. But when the tow truck driver examined it and spoke with Deputy Mitchell, he shook his head and left. The gate was on my property, installed legally, and removing it would be destruction of private property. By noon, local news trucks had arrived. A reporter from 9 News approached my door, and I gave a brief interview, explaining the situation. I kept it factual. Patricia and the HOA had tried to take my garage, had fined me illegally when I refused, and this was my legal response using property I owned. The story went live on the noon broadcast, and suddenly, my phone was blowing up. Friends from Denver, former colleagues, even my parents in Florida, all asking if I was the guy who had locked down an entire subdivision. Social media picked it up, and by mid-afternoon, Meadowbrook Hill's standoff was trending locally. The publicity seemed to shift something. Around 2 p.m., Richard Dannon called my cell phone. "Mr. Sanders, this is Richard Dannon, attorney for the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. I think we need to discuss a resolution to this situation." "I am listening," I said. "The board is willing to drop the fines related to the garage situation and agree not to pursue use of your property for HOA storage. However, you need to understand that closing this road affects far more people than just the board members. You are punishing innocent families." "Then the board should stop abusing its authority," I replied. "I want everything I stated in writing, signed by all board members and notarized. I also want a formal letter of apology posted on the HOA website and mailed to all residents. Once I have that, the gate opens." "That is unreasonable. The board is not going to publicly apologize." "Then I guess we are at an impasse. Have a good day, Mr. Dannon." I hung up. Part of me felt guilty about the impact on regular families, but another part was grimly satisfied. Patricia had spent months wielding power carelessly, making life miserable for people over petty issues, and now she was finally facing consequences. By evening, the news coverage had intensified. The story was playing as a David versus Goliath narrative, one homeowner standing up to an abusive HOA, though some reporters were more critical, focusing on the disruption to the community. I gave another interview to a Denver Post reporter, reiterating that my goal was not to harm the community but to stop the HOA's overreach. That night, someone threw a brick through my front window. It had a note attached: "Open the gate or else." I called the police, filed a report, and had the window boarded up. Deputy Mitchell came out personally to take my statement. "Emotions are running high," he said. "Do you feel safe here?" "I will be fine," I said, though I was not entirely sure that was true. "For what it is worth," Deputy Mitchell added quietly. I looked into Patricia Henderson and the HOA. "You are not the first person she has targeted with questionable fines and violations. There have been multiple complaints filed with the county over the years, but nothing ever came of it." That was validating, but did not solve my immediate problem. I spent a restless night, jumping at every sound, wondering if someone would try something more aggressive than a brick. Tuesday morning brought a new development. I received a call from a lawyer named Jennifer Walsh, who introduced herself as representing 15 families in Meadowbrook Hills. "Mr. Sanders, My clients are not part of the HOA board, and they are as frustrated with Patricia Henderson as you are. But they are also stuck. They cannot get to work, cannot take their kids to school, cannot access basic services. Is there any way we can negotiate access for residents who are not involved in this dispute? That was a fair point. I had not wanted to punish people who had nothing to do with Patricia's power trip. I am open to that, I said, but I need to make sure Patricia and the board do not just use other residents as proxies to avoid consequences. We talked for an hour and eventually worked out a proposal. I would issue access codes to individual residents who signed a document acknowledging that the access was a revocable license, not a permanent right, and agreeing to support a recall election of the HOA board. Jennifer thought she could get plenty of signatures. By Tuesday afternoon, I had opened the gate temporarily to allow residents to come and go while Jennifer organized the signature gathering. The response was overwhelming within 24 hours. She had signatures from over 60 households, well more than the threshold needed to trigger a special election under the HOA's bylaws. Patricia and the board were furious. They tried to argue that the recall petition was invalid, but Jennifer was sharp. She had followed every procedural requirement to the letter. The HOA's own governing documents required the board to schedule a special meeting within 30 days when presented with a valid recall petition. During this time, the county attorney's office did file for an injunction to force me to maintain the road as a public access route. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Marcus Chen assured me we had a strong case, but it was not guaranteed. The judge will balance your property rights against the public's interest in accessing their homes, he explained. If you can show that you are willing to allow reasonable access and that your actions are a response to genuine legal grievances, that helps. The recall petition is actually a good development. It shows you are not just being arbitrary. The special meeting for the recall election was scheduled for a Thursday evening, 18 days after I had closed the gate. The meeting was held at a local community center, since the usual clubhouse was inside the subdivision and access was still technically restricted. The room was packed. Easily 200 people showed up, which was extraordinary for an HOA meeting. Patricia and the board sat at a table at the front, looking defiant. Jennifer Walsh stood near the side with her stack of petition signatures. The meeting was contentious from the start. Patricia tried to assert control, claiming the recall petition was procedurally flawed and refusing to acknowledge it. But a homeowner named Greg Parker, who had clearly done his homework, stood up and read directly from the HOA bylaws. Section 12, subsection 4, Greg said loudly. Upon receipt of a petition signed by no less than 30% of homeowners in good standing, the board shall hold a special meeting within 30 days for the purpose of a recall vote. The petition has 63 signatures out of 87 households. That is 72%. The recall goes forward. The room erupted in applause. Patricia tried to argue, but she was shouted down. Eventually, a vote was taken. The results were overwhelming. Patricia, Linda, Deborah, and the other 2 board members were all recalled by margins of more than 80%. New board members were nominated and elected on the spot. Greg Parker became the new president, with Jennifer Walsh agreeing to serve as legal counsel. One of the first acts of the new board was to pass a resolution formally withdrawing all fines against me, renouncing any claim to my garage, and issuing a public apology for the previous board's actions. I stood up and addressed the room. I want to thank everyone for their support. My goal was never to hurt this community, only to stand up to abuse of power. Now that the board has agreed to my terms, I will be removing all access restrictions immediately. The gate will remain, but I will provide codes to all residents and the HOA for maintenance and emergency purposes." The room applauded again, though I could see Patricia and her allies sitting with crossed arms and furious expressions. After the meeting, Patricia confronted me in the parking lot. "You have not heard the last of this," she hissed. "I will sue you for harassment, for economic damages, for everything. You have made an enemy today." "No, Patricia," I said calmly. "I made an enemy 8 months ago when I moved here and you decided to target me with your petty power trips. The difference is, now you do not have any power." She stormed off, and I did not see her much after that. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she put her house up for sale within a month. The court hearing for the county's injunction was actually rendered moot by the recall election and my agreement to provide access. The judge commended both sides for working out a solution and dismissed the case. Life in Meadowbrook Hills improved dramatically under the new HOA board. Greg Parker ran the organization with transparency and common sense. Unnecessary rules were eliminated. Enforcement became reasonable and consistent. The neighborhood felt less like a dictatorship and more like an actual community. I kept ownership of Lot A, and the gate remained. But I provided access codes to all residents, and the gate served more as a symbolic reminder than an actual barrier. It also, interestingly, became a selling point. The subdivision marketed itself as gated community, which was technically true, even if the origin story was unconventional. About 3 months after the recall, I was out mowing my lawn when a car pulled up. It was Greg Parker. "Owen, got a minute?" he asked. We sat on my porch, and Greg explained that the new HOA board wanted to formalize the access situation to avoid future legal ambiguity. "We would like to purchase an easement from you for the road access," Greg said. "It would give the HOA and all residents a permanent recorded right to use Lot A. In exchange, we would pay fair market value for the easement, and we would cover all the costs of road maintenance going forward." We negotiated a deal $30,000 for a permanent easement, with the HOA taking over all maintenance and liability for the road. It was more than fair, and it removed any future uncertainty. The easement was recorded with the county, and suddenly Meadowbrook Hills was on much more solid legal ground. I used some of the money to fully renovate my garage, new flooring, better lighting, and a premium storage system. It was petty, perhaps, but satisfying. The garage that Patricia had tried to seize was now the best-looking garage in the entire subdivision. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I made genuine friends in the neighborhood, people who appreciated what I had done to break Patricia's stranglehold on the community. Frank Costello and I started a weekly poker game. Jennifer Walsh and her husband hosted a 4th of July barbecue that became a neighborhood tradition. One evening, about 6 months after the whole incident, I was sitting on my back deck with a beer when my phone rang. It was Marcus Chen. "Owen, I thought you should know Patricia Henderson just filed a lawsuit against you for intentional infliction of emotional distress and economic damages." My stomach sank. "Are you serious?" "Completely. She claims your actions caused her severe emotional distress, damaged her reputation, and forced her to sell her home at a loss. She is seeking $200,000 in damages." "Can she win?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, no. You acted within your legal rights. Your actions were a response to her illegal fines, and the recall election showed broad community support for your position. But she can still drag you through litigation for a while." "Then I guess we fight it," I said. The lawsuit took over a year to resolve. Patricia's attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive bully, who had held an entire community hostage over a minor dispute. But the facts did not support that narrative. Discovery revealed that Patricia had a history of similar abusive behavior with other homeowners, and several people came forward to testify about their experiences. The turning point came when Richard Dannon, the original HOA attorney, was deposed. Under oath, he admitted that he had advised Patricia that the garage demand was legally questionable, but that she had insisted on moving forward anyway. He also revealed that Patricia had discussed filing false police reports against me to try to force me to back down. That last revelation was a bombshell. Filing a false police report is a crime, and the information was forwarded to the district attorney's office. While the DA ultimately decided not to prosecute due to insufficient evidence of actual false reports being filed, it destroyed Patricia's credibility in the civil case. The judge granted summary judgment in my favor, dismissing all of Patricia's claims. In his written order, the judge noted that my actions, while disruptive, were a legally justified response to the HOA's unlawful conduct, and that Patricia had failed to show any basis for liability. Patricia appealed, but the appellate court affirmed the dismissal. By the time it was all over, she had spent tens of thousands of dollars on legal fees and had nothing to show for it. I ran into her one more time, about 2 years after the original incident. I was at a Home Depot in Denver, and I spotted her in the garden section. She saw me at the same moment and froze. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other across a display of potted plants. Then she turned and walked away without a word. I felt no satisfaction in that moment, only a kind of tired relief. The whole ordeal had been exhausting, and while I had won, it had taken a toll. But I had also learned something important: standing up to bullies, even when it is hard, even when it is costly, is sometimes the only way to stop them. Meadowbrook Hills continued to thrive under competent leadership. The new HOA board focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. They organized neighborhood events, negotiated better contracts for landscaping and snow removal, and maintained open communication with residents. I stayed in the house for another 3 years before taking a job opportunity in Seattle. When I sold the property, I got well above asking price, partly because the market was strong, but also because Meadowbrook Hills had developed a reputation as a well-run community with a functional HOA. At the closing, the buyer, a young couple named David and Sarah, asked me about the neighborhood. "It is a great place," I said honestly. "Good people, reasonable HOA. Just make sure you stand up for yourself if anyone tries to push you around." Sarah laughed. "Is there a story there?" "A long one," I admitted, "but it worked out in the end." As I drove away from Littleton for the last time, passing the gate on Lotta that had started everything, I felt a sense of closure. The fight with Patricia and the old HOA board had been one of the most stressful experiences of my life, but it had also taught me about the importance of knowing your rights, standing your ground, and sometimes being willing to make dramatic moves to force change. The gate remained, a permanent fixture of the community now, but it stood open, welcoming rather than excluding, a reminder that property rights matter and that even the most entrenched power structures can be challenged when people decide they have had enough. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia had moved to Arizona and had gotten involved in her new HOA board. I felt sorry for those homeowners, but I also had faith that if she tried the same tactics there, eventually someone would stand up to her just like I had. Power unchecked always leads to abuse, but power challenged, power held accountable, can actually serve the purposes it was meant for: building community, maintaining standards, and making neighborhoods better for everyone. As for me, I took the lessons from Meadowbrook Hills to Seattle. I bought a house in a neighborhood with no HOA, where I could paint my door whatever color I wanted, park my truck in my driveway, and use my garage for whatever I pleased. It was not about being defiant, it was about having learned the value of freedom and the cost of maintaining it. The whole experience became something of a legend in certain circles. I have been contacted by news outlets, podcasters, and even a producer who wanted to make it into a documentary. I always declined. The story was never about fame or attention. It was about one person refusing to be bullied and discovering that sometimes the right leverage, applied at the right moment, can change everything. I stayed in touch with a few people from Meadowbrook Hills. Frank Costello and I still text occasionally. Greg Parker sent me a bottle of whiskey when the lawsuit was dismissed, with a note that said, "To standing your ground." Jennifer Walsh referred several clients to me over the years, people dealing with HOA issues who needed someone who understood what they were facing. The question I get asked most often is whether I would do it all again, knowing what I know now. The honest answer is yes, not because I enjoyed the conflict or the stress, but because some battles need to be fought. Patricia Henderson had been abusing her position for years, making people's lives miserable over trivial matters, and nobody had stopped her because the cost of fighting seemed too high. By finding that one piece of leverage ownership of the access road, I had been able to level the playing field. It was not about revenge, though I would be lying if I said there was not some satisfaction in watching her lose power. It was about demonstrating that bullies, even ones hiding behind official titles and governing documents, can be stopped if you are creative and persistent enough. The legal system worked eventually. My property rights were upheld. The HOA's abuse of authority was checked. A new board was elected that actually served the community's interests. Justice, in its messy and complicated way, prevailed. But it took 18 days of closed gates, countless hours of stress, a brick through my window, months of negotiations, and over a year of litigation to get there. That is the reality of fighting back against entrenched power. It is not clean, it is not easy, and there are no guarantees. Still, when I think back to that Tuesday morning when Patricia first demanded my garage, I am glad I said no. I am glad I found Lotta in the property records. I am glad I had the audacity to actually close the gate. Because if I had not, Patricia would still be running Meadowbrook Hills like her personal kingdom, and some other homeowner would be dealing with her next arbitrary demand. Sometimes you have to be willing to inconvenience people, including yourself, to force necessary change. Sometimes you have to make the dramatic move, take the risk, and trust that if your cause is just, others will eventually support you. The gate on Lotta still stands. It has become part of the community's identity now, a quirky feature with an interesting backstory. New residents learn about it when they move in, how one homeowner stood up to an abusive HOA and ended up landlocking the entire subdivision until the board was recalled. Some people think I was a hero. Some think I was reckless. I think I was just someone who got pushed too far and had the unusual combination of resources and leverage to push back effectively. What I hope people take from the story is not that everyone should go out and close roads or start wars with their HOAs. Most HOA disputes can and should be resolved through normal channels: communication, mediation, legal action if necessary. But when those channels fail, when you are dealing with someone who is determined to abuse their power and will not listen to reason, sometimes you need to find creative solutions. For me, that creative solution happened to be a quarter-mile strip of asphalt that my grandfather had bought as an investment 2 decades earlier. It was pure luck that it existed, and more luck that I thought to check the property records. But once I discovered it, using that leverage was a choice, a risky, aggressive choice that could have backfired in multiple ways. It did not backfire. It worked better than I had any right to expect. The HOA board was recalled. The fines were dropped. The community improved. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is find the one pressure point that cannot be ignored and apply pressure until something changes. That is the real lesson of the Meadowbrook Hills standoff. Not that you should lock down your neighborhood or declare war on your HOA, but that power dynamics can shift in unexpected ways when someone refuses to accept the status quo. Patricia Henderson thought she held all the cards. She had the board, the attorney, the governing documents, and years of precedent. What she did not have was ownership of the one piece of property that everyone depended on. That oversight, that one gap in the armor was enough. I never regretted buying out my family's shares in Lot A. That $15,000 was the best investment I ever made, not for the eventual sale of the easement, but for what it enabled me to accomplish. It gave me leverage when I had none. It gave me power when I was being victimized by someone else's power. And it gave me the ability to force a reckoning that the community desperately needed. Looking back now, years later and hundreds of miles away, I can see the whole arc of the story clearly. It started with one unreasonable demand. It escalated through stubbornness on both sides. It reached a crisis point with the gate closure. It resolved through democratic action, the recall election, and it concluded with legal vindication when Patricia's lawsuit failed. Every step made sense in its own context, even if the overall trajectory was wild. That is how these things work. You do not set out thinking you are going to landlock a subdivision. You start by saying no to an unjust demand. Then you look for options. Then you take action. Then you deal with the consequences. And eventually, if you are lucky and right, things work out. I was both lucky and right. Lucky that lot existed and that I could acquire it. Right that Patricia's demand was unlawful and that her pattern of abuse needed to stop. The combination of luck and righteousness carried me through. Would I recommend this approach to others? Only in the most extreme circumstances. The disruption was real. People missed work, missed appointments, and had their lives complicated for more than 2 weeks. Even though most of them ultimately supported the outcome, the process was difficult for everyone. But sometimes difficult is necessary. Sometimes you cannot fix a broken system from within. Sometimes you need external pressure, dramatic action, and a willingness to endure criticism and backlash to force change. Patricia Henderson taught me that bullies with official titles are still bullies. The Meadowbrook Hills community taught me that most people, given a choice, will support fairness over arbitrary authority. And the whole experience taught me that creative problem solving and willingness to take calculated risks can overcome situations that seem hopeless. The gate remains open now, and the road welcomes all residents. But it stands as a reminder of what happened when one person said no and meant it. That is my legacy in Meadowbrook Hills, not the conflict itself, but the positive changes that came from it. The new HOA board still operates with transparency and fairness. The community still thrives. And somewhere in Arizona, I hope Patricia learned something from the experience, though I suspect she probably did not. As for me, I learned that property rights matter, that knowledge is power, and that sometimes the best defense is a well-researched offense. I learned that backing down to bullies only encourages them, and that standing up, while costly, is ultimately worth it. I also learned to always read the property records before buying a house. You never know what interesting parcels might be lurking in the neighborhood's legal history. The story ends quietly, as most stories do. No dramatic final confrontation, no last-minute twists. Just a resolution, a move to a new city, and the satisfaction of knowing I did the right thing in a difficult situation. The gate stands. The road remains open. The community is better for what happened, and I moved on with my life, carrying the lessons but not the burden of those intense few weeks. That is how you know you have truly won, when you can walk away without looking back, confident that you left things better than you found them. Meadowbrook Hills is better without Patricia's tyranny. The residents are better with an HOA that serves rather than rules. And I am better for having learned what I am capable of when pushed to the edge. The garage, by the way, still holds my tools and projects in my new house in Seattle. No one has tried to take it. But if they did, I would know exactly what to do. Say no. Find leverage. Stand your ground. And trust that justice, given time and effort, will prevail. That is the story of how I landlocked an entire subdivision overnight. It is a story about property rights, about standing up to bullies, and about the unexpected ways that power can shift when someone refuses to accept the way things are. It was the craziest thing I have ever done. It was also one of the most necessary. And in the end, it worked out exactly as it needed to.